I really appreciate everybody that wants to share about the flavor because I'm really bad at it, you know? And so I struggle to catch a lot of notes, right? When I worked at Heron, the QA/QC person, or like some of my contemporaries, like they'd do like 1 drop of the tincture, like in the snuff box, and then they'd tell me 15 notes off the tincture, and I had to use like a dropper full or something, you know? I'm like, oh, it's okay, and I'd catch 1 or 2 notes. So it's one of those, and I've been happy to actually develop that amount of limited vocabulary, and so it's nice. I appreciate, like I'd be happy to hear as much specificity about the flavor as everybody could share with their experiences.
Cool.
And even, I don't know if Missy was being facetious or whatever, but she's like, oh, I feel my lung, you know? And it's like, yeah.
Down right back here, that's to me the acrid flavor, kind of the back here, right here, yeah.
Yeah. So, this is something I wanted to suggest. Yeah, it's like take a moment to, like, let's all collect some piece of the material to taste. And then let's kind of take a second, almost like we're saying our prayer before a meal, to quiet down and settle into ourselves and take some time to silently observe the flavor and aroma and the way it makes your body feel when you taste it. And since I've just described how not great at that I am, I'll read a little bit about it. So Jaegong is bitter and acrid and neutral in temperature. It enters the lung. It can diffuse the lung and disinhibit the throat. It dispels phlegm and expels pus. And use it for cough with copious phlegm, chest distension, sore throat, loss of voice, welling abscess of the lung, and spitting pus, pus-filled sores that have not been opened.
Would that be topical application then?
For the pus-filled sores, not necessarily. So, Jaegong first appears in the Shenang Bensa Jing, which is from Han Dynasty, or 2,000 years ago. This is sort of the original materia medica in Chinese medicine. The description of, there's a kind of really bare bones presentation of Jaegong in the Shenang Bensa Jing, and so some of the information that then comes forth, like this idea about the pus-filled sores, comes. So Jaegong, in the Shenang Bensa Jing, it says Jaegong, it's classified as a medium-grade herb. It tastes pungent, slightly warm. Then, according to the Shenang Bensa Jing, it has some toxicity. This is not accurate. Because also, according to the Shenang Bensa Jing, cinnabar is a top-class medicinal and isn't toxic. And anyway. So in the Shenang Bensa Jing, it says Jaegong treats chest and rib side pain as if stabbed with a knife, abdominal fullness, deep intestinal rumbling, panic-stricken, fright, palpitations. No mention of pus. Due to the flavor, this combination of acridity and bitterness, it opens and drains, and so you can open the pus-filled abscess and drain it, and then sometime in that Han Dynasty period, from 0 to 200 AD, we have the Zhongzhong Jing's, the author, Shanghan Zabing Lun, the treatise on cold damage and associated diseases, and in that text we have Pai Nong San and Pai Nong Tong, the pus pulling decoction and the pus pulling powder, and these are the formulas, the first formulas where the abscess draining function of Jaegong emerges, because Jaegong is the principal herb in these Pai Nong formulas. And so then after we move from the Shenang Bensa Jing into kind of another text, the Mingyi Bie Lu, now the function of resolving the pus is described, you know? It seems like I'm totally off on a tangent. kind of almost barely related to your question. But so those formulas are not for topical application. It's internal abscess. Yeah. And this is not, and it's interesting too, like we think about, because in the Shenong Bensajing, they're talking about deep intestinal rumbling. Deep intestinal rumbling can be related to intestinal abscess. And in Chinese medicine, the lung and large intestine are related because they're both metal organs. And primarily the function of the qi is down-bearing, is descending. The lung qi descends, the large intestine qi descends. Some of the classical commentaries will say that by opening the lung qi, you help the large intestine descend. And I was thinking about that driving over here too, because in one sense, you think about opening, and it's opening the lung would be like this, but it's sort of like kind of like a pipette thing, where it's like when I have the pipette and I go from having it closed to opening the pipette, it pulls all the fluids up, and then when I pull the pipette, when I open the pipette, all the fluids descend. There's this idea of opening the lung and helping everything descend. And so it's a physiological function. So there's a little bit, it's opening and descending. And that is also the characteristic of the flavor, pungent and bitter. Pungent opens and diffuses, and the bitter drains and descends. And so, yeah, and then bitter is primarily, when we think about large intestine function, we're using bitter medicinals to drain and discharge the large intestine, in cases of constipation. With lung issues, it's typically acrid for opening, and then some combination of acrid and bitterness to either transform or expel phlegm.
And the bitter is usually cooling, and yet this is slightly warming. So, and it's a little bit sweet. So, I mean, I was thinking, doesn't say stuff, but maybe a little bit.
Maybe, yeah. It's kind of like that thing too. I mean, think about like we're talking about kind of secondary effect of regulating the large intestine via the lung. And then, I mean, you go through the whole alimentary canal, and you go from stomach to small intestine to large intestine, and it's like if I can't empty the large intestine, I can't empty the stomach at some point either. So it's like if I do have an impact on the large intestine, I do have an impact on the stomach. In traditional terms, this is all Yang Ming. Yang Ming is a part of the 6 conformations. Yang Ming, kind of energetically, is midday, the time of heat and dryness. And stomach and large intestine are part of Yang Ming. I was saying lung and anyway. So blah blah blah. There's always more to say. We want to taste these things. We're tasting it. We taste it. Does anybody have any flavor that they want to share that they experienced, or anything to add?
When we were outside, I took a nibble of a much thinner root piece than I did in here. And I think that maybe as it ages, the flavor changes,
Yes.
perhaps?
Yeah, and that gets, and that's kind of the previous discussion of kind of, but it's also, as the proportion of epidermal tissue to cortex and xylem changes, the flavor will change also, because the constituent profile of the skin is different than the cortex and the central xylem. Like something like Renshen, ginseng, you can buy root hairs, and it costs nothing. It's like a pound of ginseng is $150 a pound. A pound of root hairs is $15 a pound. But the ginsenosinoids are really concentrated in the skin. And so if all you want is ginsenosinoids from your ginseng, you can just buy the root hairs, and you'll have an extremely high concentration of ginsenosinoids. But this is probably a little bit too black and white. You're like, well, it's the ginsenosinoids, and they're the tritropine saponins, and that's the stereotypical constituent of ginseng, and so I should just focus on that. And it's like, that's usually losing the forest for the tree, so to speak. And if you look at something like Artemisia annua, it's really famous for being the source of artemisinin, which is the anti-malarial drug. And it's like you can give somebody straight artemisinin via IV, and then measure their blood level, and then just give them an oral decoction of the whole Artemisia annua, and the concentrate, and it's like the concentration in the plant is like 0.1 milligrams a mil, and then I give them 20 milligrams of artemisinin IV, and then I measure the blood level, and it's like the blood level's the same. And it's because all these associated constituents that actually make the artemisinin bioavailable and keep it in circulation and do all these other kind of interesting things to maximize its benefit. And so it's one of the interesting things about looking at plant chemistry. And when we focus on one constituent, it's a good learning process. When we move from 1 to the 2 to the 3, and at some point it's a massive undertaking, and to really understand the things. Like Kay was saying, it's like you said, I just want to learn one, But it's a good model, actually, because it's like rather than learning 10, 100 things in a really superficial way, learn one and learn it as deeply and as richly as possible. And so you have this standard kind of, you're like, okay, I understand, I've learned all the traditional literature, and I've gone through all the pharmacopoeial stuff and the modern constituent stuff, and I understand that there's like, there's triterpenes, there's isoflavones, there's alkaloids, and then there's the sterols, and then each of these generic classes will have maybe 5 constituents in that plant, so they end up with like 30 constituents, I mean, this is a better way of understanding, so this relates back to the macroscopic stuff, because when we look at the macroscopic stuff, that was good, I saved myself, sort of. Yeah, when we go back to the macroscopic stuff, so here we are, we have the Geng, let's look at the material that we harvested.